Genshin needs a training mode. And I'm not talking about that rinky-dink discount samurai looking ass in Inazuma, okay?
Get a job, you weeaboo prick.
I'm not talking about the thousands of poor salads that Genshin YouTubers have declared war on time and time again. I'm talking about a real training dummy, okay? Something sturdy, something reliable, something we can place in our teapots. So, while we wait for Hoyoverse to get their asses in gear, I'm gonna make my own training dummy. I proudly present the Teapot Hypostasis. This build's gonna come in two parts. We're gonna have the Hypostasis itself and then the surrounding arena. If you wanna make the Hypostasis at home, here are the furnishings you're gonna need for that. This list will also be on my Twitter if you want like a standalone picture to download or to reference. And if you wanna make the arena, here are the furnishings for that. Hey, by the way, if you think this build looks real neato, if you end up making it and liking it yourself, like the video and even subscribe to the channel. It does a lot to help me out. I appreciate it. And without further ado, here's the time lapse of the entire build. So the base of the Hypostasis build is going to be using those foundations of stone, the square stone things. Very great descriptor, I know, it's bringing his A game for this commentary, but let me tell you. It's going to be those in combination with the real MVP, which is actually using the snap by grid function, which you find in the menu. It's really a godsend for having these perfect gaps in between each of the Hypostasis cubes. Now, when you look at the Hypostasis art, you'll see that one side is offset both horizontally and then also vertically, so it's not perfectly aligned. And while I did offset these horizontally, I actually forgot to do the right-hand side. I forgot to like lift them up vertically too, which I do remember later on in the build. So don't fret, it does happen eventually. But when you're doing this build and when you're I'm lining up the second layer of Hypostasis cubes, you do want to make sure that like one of the sides is lifted vertically by another half unit, which also brings me to one point. Like for this build, I ended up going for half a square unit's worth of like space in between each of the cubes, which I think looks fine. But honestly, I think it might look even cooler if you go for a little bit of a bigger gap, like maybe one full grid square gap in between each of the cubes. So when you're doing this, if you are actually making this in your own teapot, highly recommend to play around with the spacing, see if you can maybe feel out what bigger and larger gaps would do, which would also kind of help the overall shape of the Hypostasis to be more cube-like and not like slightly rectangular like mine is. Not a huge deal, but just, you know, figure it was worth mentioning. Now, obviously every Hypostasis wouldn't be complete without a glowy core that becomes exposed after it does some move they have to wait around for in order for it to actually expose itself and be prone to damage. So here I'm using the Leeway glowy rocks. I think they just look really, really cool. The only downside is that while they do emit a little bit of light, it's really not a ton. So here I'm floating in some additional Leeway lanterns, which from my experience are the light ornaments that emit the most amount of light. So that's why I'm using these ones specifically, but basically just floating them and clipping them inside of the Hypostasis cubes right on that border, so that when you actually look up and in towards the core of the Hypostasis, it looks like it's emitting way more light than it actually does. And finally, for the last little bit of decoration for the Hypostasis, and definitely the most time intensive and honestly kind of annoying part of the build, I decided, hey, it would probably look a lot cooler if instead of it just being these like boring stone cubes, we had some ivy growing off of it. Some ivy, some plants, using a combination of bushes and then also like the actual grapevine ornaments. On this like one cube, I was thinking, okay, maybe it starts from the top and then it kind of wraps around, kind of goes in that like arcing motion downwards, right? You know, we could almost think of this not even as Teapot Hypostasis, but maybe this is what the Dendro Hypostasis is going to look like. Which also brings the question, what's the name going to be? Okay, so for anyone who doesn't know, right, each of the Hypostasis, when it has that little name that's underneath their like name card that has their HP and stuff, right? They have like a little subtitle name. Like the Animo Hypostasis name is Beth, which is kind of cute in a way, right? I almost wish that every Hypostasis name was just a really cute like middle-aged woman name, right? I wish that we could have Nancy and Stephanie. Oh, don't even get me started on Tiffany. Oh, Tiffany the Hydro Cube, that baddie? I like the way she squirt. Okay, but no, their names are actually derived from the Hebrew alphabet. So Animo Boy is Beth, which looks like this. Who else do we have? I think we have an Aleph, right? Or an Aleph, which looks like this. I can't remember which Hypostasis that is. Anyway, the point is, what's our Hypostasis gonna be? What's our Teapot? I know that one of the Hebrew alphabet names is Sin, which is what's gonna be committed when I ramp it up my tight little Bergussy. I'm sorry, bro, I gotta stop getting horny over cubes. Those geometric shapes just hit a little different. I mean, because sin signifies a rock, a peak, to devour, consume, destroy, something sharp, right? A tool to hone and pound into us to improve our gameplay and our combat prowess, obviously. Yeah, this is a pretty monotonous process, and honestly, I feel like by the end I got maybe a little too sloppy with how I was placing down the plants and deciding what they use, but it doesn't really matter, and I don't care enough. So, the mark of a true craftsman around this part, what can I say? By the way, if you're brand new to the Teapot and you're wondering how the hell I'm able to suspend these cubes and these plants in midair, or maybe you're wondering why I keep shaking furnishings into one another, I'm doing two techs called clipping and floating. I've made guides on each of these techs that goes in depth on how to initiate them, their limitations, and like troubleshooting issues with them, and even how to do them on multiple platforms, so like PC, PlayStation, and mobile. So if you have any questions about them, I highly recommend watching those, since I won't be going in depth about how to do the techniques on this video. But on top of sinking and floating, I'm actually going to be using a third tech called sinking, which lets you sink any furnishing into the ground, and specifically, I'm using it to submerge 4 lanterns in this little centerpiece area of the arena's floor to light up the underside of the hypostasis. Now, I haven't made a dedicated guide for sinking yet, so if you want something that's really in-depth on how to do it, I super recommend either RealB or Unlucky Tapabito, who both have made amazing guides on sinking. And also in general, they're just really cool people and amazing Teapot tubers who really deserve the views, so give them some love. But the really condensed TLDR version, okay, this is gonna be a terrible explanation, so I'm gonna apologize in advance, but what I'm trying to do is make a custom set with a vertical landform and any other furnishing. I personally really like using these small square pathways, but any furnishing will do. You make your custom set, you place them on top of another raised vertical landform. The amount that the second vertical landform is raised doesn't matter, it just has to be up in the air by any amount. Once you've got it on there, you will place whatever furnishing you want to sink into the ground onto your first vertical landform that's part of that custom set. You'll then take that vertical landform and then you'll sink it into the second vertical landform using the surface of it as sort of this visual representation of what the ground is going to look like. So here I'm trying to get these lanterns to about 10.5 height. When I do that, you can see that the surface of the lantern just barely peeks out over the top of the vertical landform. Once I have my height set, I'll then move the entire custom set. All right, I'll select the entire set and then I'll slide it onto the ground, which will initiate the sink. Now, the way that I did these lanterns, by the way, is like super unoptimal. All I actually needed to do was make one custom set. Then I could have just placed 4 lanterns spaced out exactly how I wanted them to be spaced out on the single landform and then sunk them that way. I was trying to do this weird thing where I was also using that custom set to place those small square landforms on top and have this sort of raised bevel on the centerpiece, but they kept doing this weird thing where they were snapping very slightly above the ground. Like 2 of them were lined up exactly how I wanted them to be, kind of like flush on the ground, just barely raised up like a little bump. But then 2 of them were kind of levitating another couple inches off the ground. And for the life of me, I just could not get it to snap on top of the other pathways. So I ended up calling that off. I ended up taking off those additional square pathways. And in general, I just did this in a really unoptimal way. So this is a good example of do what I say and not what I do. Please, God. You literally just saw me mess up that second geometric pattern, so I was just a hot mess. Don't worry, I do go back and I do fix it, although I think I actually forgot to record me fixing the pattern. Either way, that doesn't really matter. Again, I'm just making the arena and I'm just trying to make it a little bit more interesting than just having it be static gray stone pathways. But hey, it wouldn't be an arena if we didn't actually have some sort of fencing to enclose the whole thing. And I'm really not doing anything fancy here. I'm just using these fences because I think they kind of look, I don't know, gladiatorial. I was trying to maybe do something fancy here where all these corner pieces were the variation where they kind of go up in a diagonal, but when it actually is down in a build, it really doesn't look discernible at all. You can't really tell that I was using different pieces. Although, hey, I did need to go back and I did need to make a bunch more of those fences. I needed to make 7 more pieces in total, which Okay, I don't know if I'm crazy for this, but I could have easily cut that out, right? I could have easily not included me making those with Tubby, but I don't know. I think my personal philosophy, like also right here, I was like, oh, you know what? We got some new chasm pieces. Why don't I start using some of the chasm trees and maybe some of the mushrooms, maybe some of the combat battalion blockade things to, you know, spruce it up and put some decorations on. Maybe why don't I put some crystals on the corners? All of this stuff that I'm doing here, all of me making the things with Tubby could have been cut out because I ultimately ended up not using them. I did use these decorative vines that I put into the fencings. Those did stay. Literally everything else that you see ended up being scrapped. But for me, while I could have cut them out and only shown the things that ended up like ultimately making the build, I feel like I personally really enjoy the process of seeing a build from start to finish and also seeing the mindset of experimenting and playing around with what the build's ultimately going to be. Now, this also could have been remedied if I had just, you know, done preparation and made this build a couple times before actually recording it, so it could have been as optimal as it could have been. But I don't know, for me, that's not organic, right? That's not what the true actual Teapot experience is, which at least for me is like throwing a bunch of stuff to the wall, seeing what looks cool, what works, what doesn't, and then you know, customizing, changing things up and going from there, right? Does that make for maybe a worse sort of like step-by-step following guide? Yeah, it probably does make it harder to like build the build alongside me when I'm constantly changing up stuff like midway or even near the end. However, I would also say that, like, again, this all comes from my personal philosophy. I think it's boring to recreate somebody else's build one-to-one exactly how they did, you know? I think it's cool to take inspiration, and I think it's cool to recreate the like general themes and like the general layouts that people make on like their teapots. But I don't know, to recreate something one-to-one that somebody else has already done, I don't know, I feel like there's really not much of a point to it. So I don't really try to make my time lapses like proper guides, if that makes sense. I also wanted to kind of simulate what it would be like to have like a menu-based Teapot training dummy thing. So I'm using this timer here. I'm not really in the business to show you exactly how to recreate my thing like one-to-one. I want to give you an idea, I want to give you a theme, and then I want to see your version of it. I want to see how you iterate and improve on it, okay? Because I'm a sloppy boy. I'm a sloppy boy. And I want to see how you improve on it. So I like documenting the entire process. I also, hey, side note, I thought it was a really neat idea to, you know, to hang things off of the hooks from the chasm boys, because I was like, oh, you know what? If I do want to use these chasm cranes, we could kind of have this little side story going off where, oh, maybe after every training bout, these cranes are reconstructing the hypostasis. So at first I was using the crystal cores, and that was like the only thing that the chasm hook things had. But then ultimately I thought, hey, you know what? It might even be a cooler idea if instead of one of those crystal core things, actually put one of the stone platforms on instead, putting in some plants to fill in the gaps. Because at this point, I actually thought I was pretty much done with the build. Don't start putting shrubs in until you're absolutely 100% sure that you are completely done, okay? Because I put a bunch down here because I thought I was done, and then oops, turns out there was a lot more that I still wanted to add, and then I ended up having to remove most of the shrubs that you see me placing down right now. So again, just hold off. Don't place down rocks and shrubs until you are 100% absolutely sure that you have finalized what your build is going to be. But, you know, I am proud to say we actually are getting near the tail end. I'm basically just kind of adding and iterating on what we already have here, rotating the lamps to form more of like a gateway entrance. At first I was like, oh yeah, I'll offset it with some crystals, but I feel like that kind of took away too much from the hypostasis. The core on its own looked okay, but I thought, hey, you know what? I'll add another one just to make it bigger and more vibrant, which also has the side effect of it producing more light naturally. I also just wanted to check how much load I had left to work with. But then I was like, oh, you know what? I could actually just pepper the arena itself with crystals and really, you know, sink in this whole green-orange vibe that we've got going on. So this is where I finally realized, oh, right, it's a hypostasis. One of the sides needs to be vertically offset by like another half unit or so. So I'm using this vertical landform. I'm measuring the gap in between the like vertical cubes. And so I'm taking them off, placing them back on, refloating them. And okay, if I was good at this, I would also refloat all of the plants to realign them with how they were. But that's a lot of work. And hey, if you take one thing away from this video, it's that I am a lazy bum. So I didn't. I said nay. But yeah, so that's the vertical readjustment for the right-hand side. So it's up a bit, I figured, you know what, this small crane boy could probably use 2 more friends, and the result is I feel like it kind of looks like a carnival game now. Not really the intention, but it kind of works. And last but not least, I figured, hey, if I'm using the timer, I might as well actually make a little mini game out of it. I'll put that platform on there, and it looks like it's actually like reconstructing part of the hypostasis. And with that, the build is complete. And there you have it. Despite some of the slop, some of the unoptimal placing of things, I'm really happy with how this turned out, and man, I had a ton of fun putting it all together. I've also been having a ton of fun seeing your guys' builds, man. You guys have been sending me a bunch of your stuff over on Twitter, and I have been loving it. Thank you so much. If you do end up making your own hypostasis, hey, give me the results, okay? Show me, tag me. I would love to see them and retweet them like I've been doing. But anyway, that's gonna be it. Thanks again for watching, for liking, for subscribing, and I will see you guys for whatever the next video may or may not be.